Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about. We talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
Welcome back to the Round Hill Media Studios.
Well, thank you. It's always good to be welcomed back here.
I remembered to hit record.
Way to go. I had faith in you.
Thank you so much. It's already a better episode. So, hi, everybody. Thank you so much, by the way, for your nice comments about my total oopsie last week. You're very generous.
A forgiving and loving group.
But they really are.
Thank
we
you.
have a great audience, I have to say. Speaking of being a great audience, if you want to be a great audience member to Round Hill Media, would you do me a huge favor? And I'm going to solo out my screen for this. Would you be a great audience member and hit subscribe to our channel?
Please.
I would greatly appreciate it. We have been hovering, I'm just going to say it, we've been hovering at the 100 subscriber mark for a while now. And at 100 mark, YouTube gives you like magical, mystical
Powers,
customization powers that I'm dying to have. And I need like 3 more people. So I'd be so grateful. I think you would enjoy it. We put out lots of fun videos. We have some new stuff coming up here.
Yes.
In the next few weeks. So we have a special Bible-related video. I'll tease that a little bit. We were going to record it today, but Ed had an optometry appointment, so reading apparently is a challenge.
It's not good.
And then next week, I'm going to be bold. I'm going to be brave. You might hear hammering and drilling during our episode, and it's music to my ears.
It reinforces it's a work in progress.
Yes, for sure. But it's music to my ears because it is the electricians running Cat 6 cable, which I find, I feel very official saying
Whatever that is.
But they are running cables, which means that we will be able to live stream from this space, which I'm hoping to do next Monday, September, what would that be? 20th.
20th. Yes.
Thank you. September 20th at noon Eastern.
That's going to be fun.
I'm so excited. So we are launching a new live stream called Lunchtime Live. It will be conversations, kind of like this. It will be this sort of casual chat. But the nice thing about live is that if you're on there with us at the same time, it will be on YouTube, is that you can be part of our conversation. You can have comments, you can ask questions, all the things. I'm extremely excited about this.
Increasing the conversation. It'll be wonderful.
Conversation. Yeah. My YouTube guru, Heather Ramirez, shout out to Heather, said something brilliant the other day, which was that we're not trying to create an audience. We're trying to create a community.
Oh, I love that.
And this idea really came out of that, of like, how do we know we have so many wonderful community members who join as a part of our YouTube space as Round Hill Media. And so we want to like connect with you. So grab your lunch next Monday and hopefully many Mondays more.
Yes.
Alliteration. For Lunchtime Live at noon Eastern.
It's going to be exciting. I love that comment about moving from audience to community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Increasing the sacred conversation.
Oh, I think that's a subtitle, folks.
It might be.
I think we found the subtitle. So we'll pivot to this lovely book you have in your hand.
I have a book, yes. And this is a book that actually I'm on my second read through of it. Really love it and have been inviting other people in our circle of friends and community to read it. It's called 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. It's by Karen Armstrong. And there was a beautiful story in this book in the section on compassion for yourself. So we've been thinking about, what does that mean, compassion for yourself? Because sometimes it's a little bit of a tricky topic to talk about because people think of self-indulgence.
Sure.
I'm going to exercise more love towards myself in a world that really is crumbling at in every possible way.
Yeah.
So, however, that's not what Karen Armstrong talks about. Self-compassion is really about learning, actually, how to love the world in a richer, deeper, more meaningful way by loving ourselves that way as well. So if we're not treating ourselves particularly well, chances are we might not be treating the world particularly well. So simple lesson, all contained in this phrase, love your neighbor as you love yourself, which is a phrase and an idea that you can find really across all the world religions. So she has this great story in the chapter Compassion for Yourself about the late Rabbi Albert Friedlander. who grew up in a very tragic time. He was growing up in Nazi Germany. And just at the outset of the Second World War, he was about 8 years old. And so there was so much rhetoric around him about, that the Nazis were using about Jews. So this little boy had this remarkable sense of self-awareness and presence when he was 8 years old. And as she says in her book, he had grown up in Nazi Germany and as a child was bewildered and distressed by the vicious anti-Semitic propaganda that assailed him on all sides. One night, when he was about 8 years old, he deliberately lay awake and made a list of all of his good qualities. He told himself firmly that he was not what the Nazis said, that he had talents and special gifts of heart and mind, which he enumerated to himself one by one, and he vowed that if he survived, he would use those qualities to build a better world. I think that's a wonderful example of self-compassion.
That's amazing.
Isn't that? And it's just a kind of very simple thing to say, these are all the qualities that I think are really great about myself, and I'm going to use those qualities to bring greater goodness to the world. And I think that's the balance.
Yeah.
It's not just looking at ourselves and
Right.
thinking, I'm really kind of a great person. It's that how do I have these spiritual gifts, these strengths that I can then use to help other people, which is exactly what he did. He became a rabbi and a religious leader, probably touched the lives of thousands of people during the course of his lifetime.
Yeah. It makes me think about, there's a Peloton instructor who talks about changing the channel of the chatter in your head. And even if you're not in the situation like this young rabbi was, that we still have forces, sometimes our own negative thoughts that make us think these terrible things about ourselves. So that we have this sort of negative self-talk, and maybe that exercise is a way that we can counter that negative self-talk.
Fantastic example. I would completely agree. And in fact, that idea, nice segue,
Oh, hey,
beautifully done,
thanks.
touches on another book that I've been looking at these days, which sounds like it's moving in a completely different direction, but it's called The Comfort Crisis. It's by a man named Michael Easter. And to your point about exercise, he said that really one of the best ways sometimes to show compassion for ourselves is to stretch ourselves. To put ourselves in the right, I guess I would use this phrase, the right kind of stress, not too much, so it's actually damaging us.
Yeah.
But exercise-wise, it's pushing ourselves.
It's like a challenge.
A challenge.
Yeah.
And this can be a challenge that we set for ourselves on a daily basis related to exercise. It could be one huge challenge that we do on an annual basis. And in his book, he talks about, this practice that happens, I believe, within Japanese culture. I believe it's called misogi, which is a way of identifying for ourselves a challenge at which we will have a 50% chance of failing.
That's a pretty high percentage.
It's a really high percentage.
Yeah. I probably don't enter anything unless I'm like a good 75% sure I'm going to be just fine.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same way.
Yeah, my threshold for success is pretty, I don't take many chances.
Well, I think the one thing that I found fascinating about this book is that when we set that level of challenge for ourselves periodically, and again, he said, it's supposed to be something also at which you do not hurt yourself.
I appreciate that.
You want to be able to survive this thing, right?
Good, yeah.
But it can be arbitrary. You can, move a pile of rocks from one place to the next or whatever it is. It's totally up to you. But he said that the mind, neurologically, there's more and more understanding about how the mind relates to that kind of challenge because it actually is creating additional neural pathways so that the mind, in a sense, gets refreshed and cleansed by this process because it likes a challenge. So this is something that I find that's very interesting about self-compassion. In one sense, how to be affirming of ourselves, right, of the qualities we already have. But the comfort crisis says, yes, do that, and then also periodically find an appropriate way to stretch yourself.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, I was thinking about the the church year unfolds, there are some seasons of the church year where we're actually supposed to stretch ourselves. The season of Lent can be like that. So you have 40 days to do something that's out of the ordinary. And maybe that wisdom, in other words, is just kind of woven into these great sacred traditions of the world.
Yeah, you kind of find it in so many different places. I like that a lot because I feel like that's very tied into my own personality of I like to if I like try a new hobby, I always want to do like the thing that's a little bit too hard for me.
Yeah.
You know, and it's my whole family's kind of like this. We're always like, so there's a thing we could do. So how far can we push this? You know, like learning something new and trying to like just dive in and trying and like that kind of element of like, you know, it's like, what is failure? Right? Like I find the acronym a little irritating, but they say fail is first attempt in learning.
Oh,
right. Which is like, that's, well, yeah. How are you gonna learn if you don't fail? Like if you're not trying hard enough, you know, you're
right.
I feel like failure is almost something like, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough.
Right.
You know?
And that's why I think in weightlifting, you're supposed to push to failure.
Right.
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 So that becomes that's the way, in fact, the muscle grows.
That's the goal.
That is the goal.
The failure is the goal.
Interestingly enough, there was a Congregationalist scholar at the early part of the 20th century who wrote a book, wrote his own book of theology, and in it was a chapter called The Sacrament of Failure.
Ooh.
And he also said that in a way, failure is built into the human life, and it's built into the religious life, because we may say that we want to love people at all times. We want to be open and inclusive. Well, we're not all the time.
No.
Right?
Yeah. No.
So it's kind of a given. Yeah. And we fail. Okay. We understand that. So that experience of failure, however, can lead us to become more reflective. What was it about that experience that caused me to fail? And how can I open my heart so that the next time I'm more inclusive, less judgmental, all of that. And I think the whole idea about self-compassion is we sort of get to practice on ourselves first.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if we find that we're always evaluating ourselves, always judging ourselves, then that's likely to be something that we might carry out into the world.
It kind of spills over, right?
It does, yeah.
It's like that's how we approach. If that's how we approach ourselves, then that's how we can tend to approach other people if we're not, you know, trying, air quote, trying. You know what I mean? And I feel like there's a thing that I heard someone say, treat yourself like you're someone you love.
Yeah.
You know?
That would be really good.
Yeah, that's a nice idea considering you're your own lifetime partner.
Right.
You know? You are with yourself
a lot.
Your whole life, it turns out.
Yeah, so start making friends early on.
No, which is hard.
Right. Well, and you mentioned early on in our conversation about the chatter.
Oh, the chatter. My Dalcroze Eurythmics teacher called it the dude. Which I don't think he was talking about the Big Lebowski. But
probably not.
Once I saw the Big Lebowski in my like early 30s, that's all I can think about now. But yeah, so that chatter that is for musicians especially, right? So we're playing a piece of music and this voice comes in and it goes, you're going to screw up.
Yep.
You're going to mess up. Is that a sharp or is that a natural? I don't know. Do you know if it's a sharp or a natural? I don't know. Do you know? And then you panic.
And then you can hear that inner self just rubbing its hands together with glee. Like
did
it, derailed that.
Screwed her up. Yeah. And it like, and that the power of my doctoral teacher loved this. Shout out to David Brown. That he loved this idea of you kind of, I hate the word. I don't like this word very much, but you manifest what you think about. So, and that the brain, I'm going on a tangent, but the brain doesn't understand the word not. So for instance, while I'll do an exercise, do not think about your nose.
Right.
The first thing you do is think about your nose.
How's my nose looking?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, right. It's the first thing you think about because the brain goes, oh, do not. But in order to not, you have to do. So that as musicians, we try to kind of hack this system. And so you try to fill your inner chatter with useful stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a little mantra that my organ teacher in college gave me, which is calm focus. Which, if you know me, is the opposite of my normal state. So calm focus. He wrote it on the top of like every piece of music of mine.
Must have been a
I get excited.
revolutionary insight.
Yeah. So I just calm focus.
Yeah.
Calm focus. I've been known, I remember in one of my recitals, I think I did a grocery list in my head just to kind of, because I was having trouble with the chatter.
Sure.
And I needed to just think about something else.
Yeah.
And I think I thought about bananas.
Sort of a creative dislocation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a couple, I offer those couple solutions that musicians have, because when you're in this state of like, you do it once and this is the time that you do it, right? So like a performance situation, which is very high stress, you feel, I don't know, I can only speak for myself. I feel a little bit out of body. Like I don't feel fully centered always, which is always the challenge for me, is like bringing my heart rate down, really just focusing on the doing and not the, something that someone has said was, think about what you're doing and not how you're doing. So think about focusing on the actual doing and not on the like, is this good enough? Am I good enough? Is this good enough? Am I good enough?
Right.
Because that just keeps you from the actual act of doing, which in my situation is like playing the pipe organ, which is, I have enough to do.
Yeah, let that be enough.
I had a conversation with my husband yesterday where he was commenting that I bounce my head a lot when I'm playing the organ. And I needed to explain that that's because it's the only appendage I have left to conduct the choir. Because it's not something you think about, but it's all I have left.
Right.
I have nodding.
This is it.
This is all I got, because everything else is taken. That's all I got. I'm a little busy, but in that in that time where every part of your person is taken over by this doing, how you do it and your approach to it matters so much. Do you feel that way when it comes to like delivering a sermon? Like what I'm so curious about, like, what do you think about? Do you think about something else, or is it word, like, what's your chatter when you're delivering a message?
Well, I think that when there's a little bit of flow going, which is what we all hope for, right, in life, that it's kind of like being part of this right now. It's a conversation. And even though the congregation may not be talking back, although yes, and sometimes that does happen, right? There's an actual conversation, but it's trusting that there is a conversation taking place, and that when people are listening, they're thinking their thoughts and they're ruminating on things, right? Puzzling things through. Yeah. And I think that's when it's at its best. If it feels like there's a little bit of a split that's taken place and you're sort of aware of yourself preaching, that's a very disconcerting kind of moment, right? Being less in the moment than just trusting that there is an actual connection that's being forged. And I want to go back to one thing that you were talking about, though, in terms of how we talk to ourselves as a loved one, right? Or as a friend. I mean, you think about if you go to a friend and we look for advice or counsel or encouragement, they usually speak in a nice, encouraging, if they're a friend, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that it came as a kind of a revelation to me, like, wait, I can speak to myself this way. And I was thinking about this yesterday while watching the men's final of the U.S. Open tennis tournament. How could I not be thinking of this, right? Like I do. But they were saying that Daniil Medvedev, who wound up winning the tournament, when they asked him, what's going on inside your head in a match, he said, it's a tornado.
Oh.
So he has had to learn how to talk to himself in the match. Otherwise, he used to find that his inner emotions would spill over so much, he would totally lose focus on his game plan, and the whole thing would just come crashing.
Right.
Now, yesterday, looking at him, he looked so completely calm, that calm presence.
Yep.
But you know that inside his head, a lot of stuff is going on. But at least a major force in there is that he has learned how to talk to himself. And I would say, my great philosophy of life moment here, that a big part of learning how to live well is learning how to talk to ourselves.
I think you're right.
And that can be a real gift and a practice of self-compassion that then can spill over to everybody else. Because sometimes unwittingly, we can be really hard on ourselves. And many times during the course of a day, I find myself saying, up. Just as I start down a road, I'll say, wait, you don't need to go there. And over time, I've gotten better at simply saying, yeah, you're right. Let that go. I don't need to revisit that story.
Yeah.
I don't need to think that through again. Let's move on to something else. You've covered that.
Yeah. That you don't gain anything by going in a circle around that. But that's such a powerful thing to be able to stop.
Yeah.
And be like, that's not useful to me.
But this is really helpful right now.
But also, like, it's this kind of idea of we have so much. I seem to come back to this a lot in our podcast. We have so much control over kind of our bubble. Like we can. I feel like when there's so many negative outside forces coming at us, we have so much control over the chatter and the choice of how we are going to start our day and approach our day and talk to ourselves and therefore also treat and speak to others,
I really agree with you. I think we have more I think the phrase we like to use these days is we have more capacity.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, that's much better than control.
In that regard. But
that's a more loving word.
But it is good, too, to think of it that way because quite often these days we hear people say, like, I feel like everything's out of control. Like, what's the next thing that's going to, flame out?
Right.
And but in fact, there is a certain degree of healthy self-control that we can use. And I think that's the phrase that comes to me. I was just thinking about something I realized many years ago in the story of Jesus. One of the first things that anyone said about him, which was a positive thing, was he spoke as one having authority. And that word authority really means being the author of your own thoughts.
Oh, that's good.
Right?
I like that.
So it's not being the authority, it's having the authority to say, I've created these thoughts out of my own mind, in a sense, in a conversation with myself.
Wow.
And then that's the spirit I bring to others. And he then encourages other people to be the author of their lives constantly by asking questions, right? And bringing that forth from them.
Well, and that's so interesting because my dear friend Julia and I talk about, who is that negative voice in your head? And right? But like sometimes it's the voice of a person you've had particularly negative experiences with, and it becomes their dialogue becomes your internal monologue. And so you're losing that authority.
That's correct.
And I think that, we talk about, my friend and I, we talk about like, you're trying to like make that go away, but there's something very empowering about, you're not making it go away. You're reclaiming.
That's it. That's a great word to describe it.
Your inner monologue. You're reclaiming your conversations with yourself and you're reclaiming your headspace.
So true. And I think that's why that story is so wonderful from Karen Armstrong. Here's this little 8-year-old boy who's reclaiming his authority. He said, this is not who I am.
Yeah.
Right? What they say about me is not who I am. This is who I am. And I'm going to be faithful to that.
I got goosebumps from how you called that back. That was so good. That was really well done.
It's a great story.
It's a great story. But it comes all back to this idea of compassion for yourself, which then spills over to everything around you.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if you can't do that for yourself, who can you do it for?
Yeah. You really have to have, I think, in a sense, the experience of it in order for people to be able to sense that, oh yeah, we understand what you're talking about, because clearly you've been down that road.
Right.
And you've worked, that we've worked hard at this. And I don't think that this inner challenge ever goes away.
Sure.
I think this is always part of who we are because we're always absorbing voices,
Right.
right? We're always interacting with people and forces and things that may not be positive and affirming and so on.
Right.
So we keep coming back to that.
Is that kind of what they consider when they call it the human condition? I'm never 100% sure what they're talking about.
Well, I think you're getting really close to it.
Yeah.
Because this does feel like a condition.
Which there is no cure.
Right. This is part of the landscape. We could look at it as an opportunity, it's like an ongoing clarification process. But I think that's well said. It is part of the human condition to be like this.
Yeah.
And yet the good news is that we have, as you point out, we have this capacity to move beyond it. And that's exciting. That's really exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for spending this time with me today, Ed.
Thank you, Leslie.
This was a great episode.
Great conversation.
It was really fun. And so we look forward to seeing you all back here next week. Thank you for joining us on Roundtail Radio, brought to you by the friends and members of Roundtail Community.